Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We are blessed to be joined by Congressman Cliff Bentz of the 2nd District of Oregon to talk about energy policy, gas prices. Obviously, this has been in the news a ton. We're hearing one thing from the administration, and then it sounds like the next day we hear something else from the Biden administration. So hard to really get the facts straight about what's going on. So very grateful to have Congressman Bentz of Oregon joining us today. And before we dive into the substance, just want to make sure that folks on the line know that Congressman Bentz is a champion of our issues here at AFP. He is, one of the highest scoring members on the AFP scorecard in Congress this session. He's the only Republican in the Oregon delegation, has by far the highest score on our scorecard of his state delegation. And has taken some pretty tough votes to side with us, side with taxpayers throughout this session of Congress. So I wanted to say thank you, Congressman Bentz, not just for joining us today, but for your leadership throughout this session of Congress. Thank you for joining us.
I'm very, very happy to be with you today. I really appreciate the opportunity. And thank you for your kind words about tough votes. They are tough votes, but I'm very, very happy to have the opportunity to represent the 2nd District of Oregon, and happy to be with you folks today.
Thank you, Congressman. And then we're also joined by Abby Tardif, who is on the policy team at Americans for Prosperity. She is our energy and regulatory policy expert. So obviously no shortage of demands on Abby's time and expertise. So very grateful to you, Abby, for joining us as well.
Thank you.
So yeah, let's go ahead and dive in, Congressman. As I mentioned, obviously, folks hear a lot on the news. They hear President Biden saying that there's nothing he can do, and there's going to be pain. But at the same time, his administration is doing everything they can to minimize the price hikes. But tell us, based on what you've seen that the administration has said and done since they came into office last January, is that true? Have they really done everything that they could to make sure that our supply of energy is at its highest point in the U.S.?
Well, absolutely, they have not. And so the fact that they're trying to find someone to blame, in this case, they're trying to blame, of course, Putin for everything. And by the way, he's deserving of a lot of blame. But when it comes to actually doing something about the consequences of the war in Ukraine and the already previous to the war skyrocketing fuel prices and the inflation that causes, they're not doing anything other than talking, which is and I'm being harsh, but if you were to go into my district, by the way, my district is over 2/3 of the state of Oregon, and Oregon's a huge state. I think it's the 10th largest state in the continental United States, and it's you have to have fuel, you have to have diesel, you have to have gas, and the prices are skyrocketing. So they need to be doing way more than they have been doing, and the fact that they're begging Venezuela and other Saudi Arabia and other countries for more oil proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that they understand the need, but they're unwilling to open the door to drilling and use of the assets we have right here in America. It's really sad.
Absolutely. So what are some of those regulatory actions? We know that divided Congress, not a lot has been getting through, but when they first came in the door January of last year, right away, they took a number of regulatory executive actions with the president's pen. What were some of those that have inhibited our supply of energy?
Well, his freeze on all new oil and gas projects is shutting down the Keystone Pipeline. The failure to expedite the approval of energy and pipeline developments, and the thing that is really damaging, and most people don't know about it, is the attempts by various environmental groups to stop the financing, the flow of money to oil and gas companies to try to address finance new drilling operations. The oil and gas companies are, we all know, is highly reluctant to invest the literally tens of millions of dollars in these systems, only to have the rug jerked out from underneath them when perhaps the war stops or some other event occurs. Why would they do it? And they're just, it's like Charlie Brown and Lucy in the football. They're just not going to do it again. They're not going to do it. And so what Biden needs to do is step up and say, look, we're not going to suddenly zig again, as opposed to zag. We're not going to do it. And frankly, I'm not sure anybody would believe him, but at least he could try. And those things need to be happening right now. Going back to my district again, the cost of fertilizer for the hundreds and thousands of farmers and ranchers across my district, it's gone up threefold. And just, I think, 30–40% in the last, since the war started. It's crazy. And without fertilizer, the damage to our food production systems is going to be ridiculously high. And if ever there was a year when we need to be producing all of the food we possibly can, it's this year. If you look what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and the fact that they produce some huge 16% the total world supply of wheat and barley. So anyway, I'm rambling on. I just must say, I have so little patience for the Biden administration saying one thing and then not doing anything to help.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on something important. I want to bring Abby here to expand a little bit on where else people are going to feel these cost increases. We all drive down the road and we see that gas costs $4.25, and we see our home heating bill when it comes in the mail every month. But our entire economy relies on having affordable, abundant, reliable energy. So in addition to food costs that the Congressman touched on, Abby, where else might we feel these costs? Maybe not tomorrow, but 2 weeks, a month, 2 months from now.
Yeah, so I think it's important to recognize a lot of the actions that the Biden administration is taking, whether that be through executive order or through their proposed rulemaking process. And so some of these rules and these actions that they're taking, you are going to see them raise prices at the pump, which you're already seeing in your electricity, home heating bills, but also you're seeing the cost of vehicles is going to go up, whether that be a used vehicle or a new vehicle. Their new rule that they have introduced for GHG tailpipe emissions that could raise the price of a vehicle by $1,000. And for an average American, that is a really big impact on them. And so I think you're seeing it across the board right now that there's a lot of increase in prices. And so it's not just going to be your food increases and your gasoline prices, but it's also going to be other items that you're buying as well or trying to pay for. Right now, you're seeing even the price of a ticket to fly is more expensive because jet fuel is more expensive right now. So I think that a lot of the regulations that they're putting in place or the executive orders that they're relying on, we need to be looking at reforms and looking at new ways to kind of peel some of that back to make this not so overreaching in scope and to actually find solutions to help Americans.
Absolutely. And this is a really important point, right? We've talked about food and gas prices, and those two items alone, the average American will pay additional $2,000 in higher gas prices this year. That will come on top of an additional $1,000 in higher grocery costs just because of inflation. And then you tack on all the issues over the past month or so because of the war. So as you mentioned, Abby, these costs are going to be felt across the economy. Every good that's shipped by truck that takes diesel fuel, the price is going to go up. So the Congressman touched, Abby, on a couple of the big things that folks might have heard about: the Keystone XL Pipeline, the decision to ban new oil and gas leases on federal lands. But what are some of the other regulatory decisions the administration has made on some of the statutes that folks might not have heard of that you think are making an impact on the ability to develop and transport energy in this country?
Yeah, so I think a few of those are some permitting regulatory actions that are really impacting that. And they impact both oil and gas infrastructure, but also renewable infrastructure and energy projects. So that would be NEPA, Waters of the United States, and the Endangered Species Act. These are all things that the previous administration tried to make reforms that would help people, help projects be done more efficiently and effectively in a more timely manner that would cost taxpayers less. And now we're seeing those be undone. And it's really difficult when you're looking at something like NEPA being done. And the administration currently is talking about, we want to build more, we want to build back better, but they're erecting new barriers to being able to do that building that they're hopeful to do. So I think that those are some long-lasting and decades-old regulatory barriers that hold back these projects and hold back innovative solutions.
Yeah, which is one of the greatest ironies, Congressman. We know that you're a champion of water issues and a number of other natural resources issues. And, as you mentioned, we know that this administration is no friend of sort of traditional forms of energy, and they talk a lot about renewables and things like that. But as Abby mentioned, a lot of these regulatory barriers, they also stand in the way of renewable energy and new innovations in the energy space. And so with your work on the Natural Resources Committee and water issues and things like that, what are some of the impacts and the different regulations you've seen that have really inhibited the ability of Americans to innovate in the energy and natural resources space?
Gosh, it's kind of hard to know where to start. There are so many regulations. I used to say a haystacks of regulations. I think I'm far understating the problem, but one of the ones that comes to mind most readily out here in the eastern part of the very, very great state of Oregon is the fact that solar power would be a kind of a natural for out here, because we have huge spaces. The county I'm sitting in right now is almost 10,000 square miles. One county, and the huge empty spaces. There's only about 35,000 people in that 10,000 square miles. So oddly enough, there's empty space out here where you could be putting solar, and you would hear every environmentalist say, "Oh yeah, solar's great." But when it comes to actually citing a solar project, then all of a sudden they want to have special hoops. NEPA would be the least of it that you have to go through. So if you want something larger than 100 acres, well, 100 acres is nothing out here. Literally, it's nothing. We talk in terms of millions of acres out here. And yet you would think that when you come in to put a solar project on 100 acres, that you are going to be upsetting the Louvre or some other place that's unbelievably valuable, and you're not. It's sagebrush. It's sometimes it's not even sagebrush. It's an old dry alkali late red bed. Anyway, my point is, somehow along the road, the Democrats have decided that process is more important than actual progress, and that's really, really sad. And we need to be doing something. One of the things I had suggested yesterday actually was a mandate holiday, because we have all these mandates. And when you said gasoline at $4.50, good grief, the people in Portland are paying $6.50 a gallon, and in California I think it's $7.50. And why? Because the mandates those states have imposed upon gasoline in order to drive the price up so you will run out and buy an electric car are crazy expensive. And we need to have a holiday that would immediately drop the price of fuel down, maybe somewhere closer to that $4.50. It's crazy that I would be begging for $4 gas, don't you think? But that's exactly where we find ourselves. Again, I could go on, and I'll stop because lots of interesting issues.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think one of the things you pointed out, one of the great ironies of the movement that we're seeing is that there seems to be this assumption that the two are irreconcilable, to be a champion of the environment and the clean environment, and also a champion of affordable, reliable, and abundant energy. And I think you're a good example, Congressman, of that not being the case, which is that you can care for the environment, but you can also care about your constituents and their ability to have affordable, reliable energy. So, you mentioned that your district is very large, it's rural. How do you sort of reconcile those two issues? Obviously, environmental stewardship is important in your district. It's important to the people that you represent. So how do you sort of balance those, and how do you make sure that they work together rather than against one another?
Can you state those again? Someone next door began to hammer on something just as you were asking your questions. So please restate them for me.
Yeah, so I was just saying that, a lot of folks act like it's impossible to be both a champion of a cleaner environment and care for your natural resources, but also champion affordable, reliable, and abundant energy. But the two do not have to be opposed to one another. And I think you're a great testament to the fact that you can be a champion of both. And I think your work in Congress has demonstrated that. So could you talk a little bit about your work in Congress and how those two kind of fit together within one another rather than to compete against each other?
Right. And thank you for the great question. And of course, you have to use that which we have available. And it's so obvious now that we have to find those things in our country. I know rare earth minerals that make it possible for us to have electric cars, right? The type of things that you need to build a windmill, even though I don't support windmills, I do support solar because it's something that works in great big open spaces. But you can have these kinds of projects and at the same time have a protected environment. I would just suggest, I will just compare for a moment and contrast wind power, which are these huge windmills up in the sky, with some people call them bird killing devices, and they are, as those things turn around, that's what they do, they kill birds. But solar, no, solar's low and close to the ground, and you can do it. And if you're going, and again, on the water side of things, yes, we want water in the streams for fish, and I'm the ranking member on the water subcommittee. Yeah, we want water in the streams for fish, but you can't just focus in times of incredible drought, which we're going through right now, on one species. You've got to take care of everybody. And that means appropriate allocation of water to both the in-stream interests and out of stream interests. And you can have both. But if you go to a fish biologist and ask how much water you want, they're going to say, we want all of it. Well, it's not going to work, because there's all these other things outside of streams called people, for example, in cities, and they have to be protected. And the two can get along. And same is true with oil development, or gas development. We have some of that going on right here. There's a great big gas play here right under the ground where I am sitting in the far eastern part of Oregon and western Idaho. And that has been developed with absolutely no impact upon the environment. And yet we have excellent source, a brand new source of oil and gas. And so, yes, there's all kinds of ways of doing this correctly. And goodness knows, I have spent years working on water and environmental issues, and I know it can be done.
Absolutely, and absolutely a champion of those issues. You mentioned some of the foreign countries that the administration is going around asking to increase production: Venezuela, Iran, Saudi Arabia. I mean, these are not only very unreliable, sort of authoritarian oil states, but the other thing is that they are much, much likelier to do these things in a dirtier fashion. The United States obviously has very high standards around this stuff. We do things cleanly, efficiently, professionally. And so, Abby, can you talk a little bit about our processes and sort of what goes into it? I know the administration has been claiming that there are 9,000 unused oil leases, and so there's nothing that they can do to make sure that we're increasing production. But what really goes into producing, developing, transporting oil and gas in this country? And is the administration right, or is there more that they can do to make sure that we're doing it so that the demand is kept here rather than going to dirtier countries, unreliable countries like Venezuela and Iran?
So those leases are just leases and are not permits. And so once you have a lease, you must also maintain a permit. And so that can take a while to get that process underway, but also what can take a long time, and why the process is not just, it does not happen overnight the way it's being described, is there is land that you might get that there is not enough oil and gas that drilling will really occur there. And so you kind of have to do a discovery period to make sure to see, like, is it really worth it to invest this money and to drill on this land? This period all takes a few years to do. It isn't just that simple of, we have these 9,000 leases and we can do this overnight. That's definitely a misconception of what's being said out there right now about these leases. Also, I think it's important to recognize that, and many oil and gas companies are also saying this right now, is a lot of the actions being taken by the administration are telling them to not drill and to not be producing more. And so right now what you're seeing the administration say is, well, drill now, but don't later. And that's still sending that mixed signal to them that what they have to offer right now is necessary, but it won't be in the future or in the near future. There's just so much uncertainty for them of how much should we be investing? How much of our time should be spent on this versus trying to transition to renewables? And I think that that kind of confusion is not the way we can be operating in this space to be having energy abundance. we need a portfolio that has all different forms of energy. We need renewables, but we also need to rely on our natural resources and what we have to offer as a country. And I think that this situation we're in right now really shows that. And I think all the actions being taken by this administration kind of highlight that too.
Yeah, it certainly seems, based on what you're saying, Congressman, what you were saying is that the administration's policies yesterday, so to speak, when they came in, they inhibited oil and gas development. Right now, there are policies in place that are inhibiting not just oil and gas, but regulation that's inhibiting renewable energy and more energy innovation that they've left in place or rolled back good reforms from the past administration. And then pointing to the future, their policies are sort of discouraging investment because, to your point, it takes millions and millions of dollars and years to invest in energy infrastructure. And so I guess that just leaves us sort of, where do we go from here, Congressman? I mean, if you could kind of wave a magic wand, you and your colleagues in Congress, like, what would you be calling on the administration to do as far as changing direction and bring down costs for the American people, not just today as we're in the middle of this crisis, but really going forward years into the future?
Right. Well, what an excellent question, because it calls out absolutely clearly the failure of the Biden administration to have what we call out here a plan. I mean, it's a rare phrase, isn't it? A plan. So the plan would be to, if you're going to recognize that you don't want to be held hostage to all these countries that have all this oil, and I include Saudi Arabia in that group, everybody, because as you know, there's been hints that Saudi Arabia wants to switch over to using Chinese currency for all of its transactions. Well, that's not a comforting thought, is it? But we can't be leaving ourselves open to this kind of extortion. And so you need a plan of transition to a type of energy future that you won't be held hostage. So what is that energy future? Well, one thing that comes immediately to mind is natural gas. We have a 150-year supply of it. And yet you can see that the Biden administration, in its desire to not be held, I'm not sure what, up to criticism by the environmental community, is trying to do this herky-jerky approach to transitioning out of fossil fuel and into the electric future without appropriate thought to how long it's going to take and what to do along the line, so you don't end up with these incredibly unfortunate situations where nobody wants to invest in what isn't going to be used in the future, oil and gas. So where is that transition plan? Where is it? And so I think, and I hope during this week in our Republican retreat, which I'll be flying down to tomorrow in Florida, we'll be talking exactly about this and working our way through what that long-term plan should be. And it has to include fossil fuel. It has to, because that's what about 80–90% of what we use for energy comes from. And I want that fossil fuel to be here in America. Natural gas is probably the best focus. And you look at the Biden administration shutting down export facilities. The one at Coos Bay here in Oregon would have been an $8–9 billion investment. And we could have been helping with Europe's situation, where it's being held hostage by Russia, Germany in particular, if we had the export facilities, if they had the import ones. And this long-term planning should have taken that into account. Everybody knew this was coming. Akash, Abigail, we all knew we were setting ourselves up for this. Surprised it took so long. Now here we are. And the short answer is, let's get a plan.
Absolutely. And Abby, I do want to kick it over to you in a second to walk through some of the bills that you're keeping an eye on. But you mentioned Germany, Congressman, and we've actually seen some of the actions they've taken to rethink some of their decisions and as far as their energy infrastructure and the sources that they rely on. And so absolutely, it seems that folks are learning a lesson. Before I turn it over to you, Abby, really quickly, Congressman Bentz, one of the things that when we were sort of discussing doing this event with you, it was pointed out that you took a really courageous vote last year to vote against the so-called bipartisan infrastructure framework that had a lot of the administration's sort of flawed energy goals built into it, kind of Green New Deal style policies and things like that. When both parties are coming together to spend over $1 trillion, it can't be anything great, despite what folks might have been hearing from the administration and others in Congress. So if you wouldn't mind, just give us a brief explanation of sort of what went into casting your vote against that, because that was something that we appreciated here at AFP and was a pretty courageous stand on behalf of taxpayers and against bad energy policy.
Right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to explain my vote. I had supported the three last very, very large, I think the biggest ones ever, infrastructure packages when I was in the Oregon legislature here in Oregon. So I support infrastructure. I want that absolutely clear. But I also understand how I understand the real needs in the infrastructure space, the ones that are so real and becoming so apparent now as we find ourselves short of fuel and really, really behind the 8 ball. And I saw when I looked at that bill, a huge amount of money going to what I will call greenwash, I guess is the way to put it. I mean, I've never seen so much money being spent on so little. The one that was really absolutely grinding to me was the amount of money spent on Amtrak in the billions, tens of billions of dollars. So that, I'll just use that one example. There were many others, but that money should have been going to bridges. It should have been going to energy planning. It should have been going to export facilities. It should have been going to all the stuff that's now so obvious. And that's why I voted against it. I felt bad. There's a lot of good stuff in it. But on the other hand, you can't be throwing away literally hundreds of billions of dollars when the needs in this country for real infrastructure are so great.
Absolutely, and we appreciate that. So, Abby, as we close out here, I mean, we talked a little bit about solutions. What are some of the bills that AFP is tracking that our activists should be keeping an eye on and urging their members of Congress to support?
Yeah, so I think some of the bills that we're supporting right now and we're tracking closely is the Strategic Production Response Act that was introduced originally in the Senate by Senator Barrasso, and a companion has been introduced by Representative McMorris Rogers in the House. And that's something that would make sure that the SPR, if tapped into, which the Biden administration has done, is done properly, and that there's also a plan to make sure the US is producing more oil and gas to replenish the SPR as we move forward. Another bill that we're tracking, and we have been for a while and very supportive of, is the Unshackle Act, which is Senator Lee's NEPA reform. And that's something that I think is really key to all of this. If I'm thinking of a magic wand of how we could fix or how to get some policy solutions out there, is there's just a lot of regulatory reform that needs to happen right now to make sure that these projects and energy abundance is made possible. And I think that this Unshackle Act by Senator Lee would be extremely helpful to get that very important NEPA reform done. It's a very old regulatory burden that's been out there. And I think that there needs to be some serious consideration taken on, as we move forward and we live in a space where we want there to be new innovative solutions, how these decade-old regulatory barriers are impacting us from moving forward.
Absolutely. So, obviously quite a bit on the table here, but it sounds like what both of you have been telling us today is that the administration, with the stroke of a pen, could undo some of their harmful regulatory actions and increase the supply of domestic energy fairly quickly in the midst of this crisis. But then at the same time, there are things that Congress could do to make sure that something like this never happens again, that we're never in the position of facing exorbitant gas prices and having to ask unfriendly countries, frankly, to increase their production, because we have quite a bit here to make use of within the traditional energy space and energy innovations in renewables. So, Congressman, as we wrap up here, any closing thoughts for folks on the line or activists in your state and across the country?
Well, I look forward to supporting the bills that were just mentioned. I think I may already be on the McMorris Rogers bill. I'm on so many of those bills, I've kind of forgotten. But I look forward to supporting whatever it takes to help us reach energy back into the energy independent space. Look forward to working with Americans for Prosperity on these really important issues, and I really appreciate this opportunity today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Congressman Cliff Bentz, the 2nd District of Oregon, a champion of our issues here at Americans for Prosperity. Abby Tardif, a member of the policy team here at AFP. She's got a great blog post on our website about 25 policy decisions the administration has made that are making our energy costs higher. So highly recommend folks go on our website, check that out, get involved. Very much appreciate everyone joining us today, and hope everyone has a great rest of their week. Thanks, everyone.